You're listening to Economics Detective Radio. My guest today is Mario Macis of Johns Hopkins University. Mario, welcome to Economics Detective Radio.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be on your program.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So our topic for today is some work you've done on repugnant transactions, specifically with respect to organ and blood donation, and we're going to discuss some legislation that might affect compensation of organ donors in the future. So, but before we get to that, Mario, how about you start by giving me the background? How did you get into researching this topic?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a great way to start this conversation. So, my interest in morally controversial transactions started when I was still in graduate school. And together with my friend, college classmate, and now co-author Nico Lacetera from the University of Toronto, we started, talking about research interests that we had in common, and that combined a broader set of passions that we shared, including volunteering and giving blood. I was also interested we were both interested in incentives and the role of prices in markets in general. And we started talking about a possible collaboration with an Italian blood bank that had been using some really interesting incentives to increase blood donations. So we started talking to the blood bank and learning about the creative ways in which this Italian blood bank would motivate their population to give more blood. And we thought that there were some really interesting research questions. The two incentive schemes that we started with were the following. First of all, in Italy, since I believe the 70s, blood donors who are employees of an organization are entitled to a full day, a 1 day leave of absence, fully paid. Essentially, when they give on the day, they give blood or plasma. So what happens is that the government reimburses the employer for the lost wages, and the employee gets paid. So that is a strong economic incentives with a non-negligible sort of cash value. And how different theories in economics have different predictions for what should happen when people who are performing an altruistic activity in the absence of incentives start receiving an economic incentives. You look at sort of standard economic theory would predict that as you increase the price of any activities, including altruistic activities, you should get more of those activities. The supply should increase when the reward for the activity goes up. However, there are theories in psychology and in behavioral economics that predict the opposite. When you introduce an explicit incentive, in particular an economic incentive for activities that people perform in the absence of any explicit rewards, there could be a crowding out of intrinsic motivation. Donations could actually decline instead of increasing. So that was one sort of intriguing research question and an intriguing and considerable economic incentive. And we were able to obtain data from the Italian Blood Bank to sort of empirically evaluate the effects of that incentive. The other incentive scheme that this Italian Blood Bank had in place was a system of symbolic rewards. Rewards that would be given to blood donors when they reach certain milestones in their blood donor history or tenure. The milestone were 8 donations, 16, 25, 50, 75, and 100 donations. At each of those milestones, donors would receive an award. And so, one of the most interesting aspects of this reward scheme was that the first three awards, again, pins and medals, were given to the donors privately by the blood bank, whereas the awards corresponding to the 50th, 75th, and 100th donations would be given in a public ceremony, and the names of the awardees, of the donors, would be published in the local newspaper. So there was an element of a strong element of public recognition. And we thought that this incentive scheme, coupled, of course, with blood donor data from the Italian Blood Bank, would give us a nice opportunity to study the role of symbolic rewards and social recognition and social prestige in motivating individuals to do good, to give blood in this case. So that's how this research agenda sort of got started. We started by asking whether explicit rewards encourage blood donation, and how explicit rewards interact with donors' intrinsic motivation to do good in society.
Okay, and did you find that that these rewards tended to increase the amount of donation? How were you able to identify their effect?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's what we found indeed. So for the leave of absence, the paid leave of absence policy, identification of a causal effect was a bit challenging because we didn't have individual level data for the period before the reward was introduced. What we did was we compared donation behavior of groups of donors who were eligible for the incentive and groups of donors who were not eligible for the incentives, specifically donors who were employees of any public or private organization would be were eligible for the incentive, whereas self-employed individuals who don't have a job, who don't have a job, unemployed, or students, individuals who are retired, they don't enjoy the benefit. And we also exploited within person variation. Like we were able to follow. We had longitudinal data, so blood donor data over time. So, and with information about the occupational status of individual donors, so we could observe, students getting jobs, for example, while remaining in blood donors. We could observe people losing their jobs, or people switching from being employed into retirement. And so we exploited those transitions into and out of being eligible for the reward. Subject, of course, as with any observational study, subject to our identification strategy, we identified a pretty strong positive effect of the incentives in the order of inducing increases of 20, 30, and even 40% in the number of blood donations made every year. But this is, of course, right. It's a big reward. It's a full day paid. There, we also find some anecdotally interesting ancillary effects. For example, there's for employees, for blood donors who are employees, there's a significant bunching on Fridays. The idea, and again, this is in the data, but anecdotally from friends who are blood donors or who have knowledge of blood donation in Italy, what happens is that rationally individuals present to donate Friday morning, and then they take off for a long weekend. So that explains the Friday effect that we also find in the paper. As far as the symbolic medals or rewards incentive, we find that as donors approach the donation that makes them eligible to receive the award, they speed up. Essentially, they donate faster compared to their normal or usual interval between two consecutive donations. This effect is we found only for the donations that correspond to the public awards. We don't find any speeding up, in correspondence to the privately awarded medals, which we interpret as an indication that donors do respond to the symbolic awards. They value them, and which explains, by the way, why this particular blood bank was using the incentive in the first place.
Interesting. So people do care about being able to be publicly recognized for their service and for giving blood and doing what is providing a service that saves lives, and it can, so that accords well with my intuition about donation and about just people's sort of social motivations. Um, it's I mean, I don't know if they do it in Italy, but often they give you when you vote, they give you a sticker that says "I voted," and you know, and it just shows other people, "Hey, I contributed," and people seem to like that, and so it kind of it fits the pattern of people.
That's exactly right. Engaging in, I mean, people engage in altruistic behaviors for many reasons. There's, of course, altruism. The desire to just do good, to help others. But there's also, additional or other motives. Including, the desire to signal, to, like you said, to indicate to others that you are a certain type of person, that you are the type of person who cares about others, and for that signal to you are the type of person who cares about others. And so if one of the reasons why people donate is to indicate to others that they are a certain type of person, that they care about the well-being of other individuals, then creating opportunities for them to display, to signal publicly, sort of, that they're otherwise difficult to convey a characteristic, is valuable to donors and will induce individuals to donate more. What you said earlier, you asked me, what our identification strategy was for the day off Italian policy. That was a really, great observation, because clearly, identifying effects in this context can be tricky. So the what we did is sort of, what we did next was we started a conversation with the American Red Cross.
Hmm.
The American Red Cross routinely uses in certain regions of the U.S. incentive items that they offer to their donors, and we're talking about, a variety of items, from mugs to pins, T-shirts, umbrellas, jackets, but also coupons and or gift cards for stores. The fact that they use those incentive items should suggest, right, that they are well liked by donors. But we thought, Nico Lacetera, and Bob Slonim, and we thought that obtaining data from the Red Cross to study empirically the effect of offering those incentive items would be an interesting thing to do. And so we did. We contacted, and we were very lucky to establish a really productive relationship with the American Red Cross Blood Services in Northern Ohio, in Cleveland. We started a collaboration. They very generously shared a ton of data with us. And they also allowed us to conduct a randomized control trial. with funding from the NSF, the National Science Foundation, we essentially ran an RCT, randomized control trial, where we randomized the assignment of economic incentives across blood drives and within blood drives across prospective blood donors. With an RCT or a randomized control trial and a treatment group and a control group and the possibility of observing donor behavior prior to the assignment of incentives and then post after the assignment of incentives gave us a really unique opportunity to empirically test in a sort of credible way the impact of economic incentives on blood donation. We were interested in purely economic incentives. As you mentioned earlier, and as we have seen in one of the Italian blood donor studies, people are not just motivated by material rewards, but they care about symbolic rewards and the possibility of, for example, wearing an American Red Cross T-shirt to indicate that they are regular blood donors. So we wanted to remove in our study, we wanted to remove any symbolic component from the incentive items. And so we opted for offering in our study a variety of gift cards for $5, $10, and $15. The gift cards were for a variety of stores. We had grocery stores, we had some big department stores, and also a chain of gas stations. Donors could choose which gift cards to pick, and by varying the amount, 5, 10, and $15, we sort of we had an opportunity to test whether the supply for blood is upward sloping, whether we get more donations if we offer a larger reward. We were also able to observe blood donor behavior at blood drives or sites that didn't offer incentives, but that were in the neighborhood of blood drives that did offer incentives. We were interested in determining whether, for example, offering incentives at a specific blood drive would not only affect donations at that drive, but perhaps steal donors away from neighboring drives. We were interested in direct effects, but also in detecting any possible displacement or substitution effects of offering incentives. And running this RCT in Ohio gave us a large-scale RCT in Ohio gave us an opportunity to really answer some of those questions.
Interesting. So these incentives are a lot smaller than the Italian ones. A whole paid day off work is, depending on how much you earn, but presumably you earn more than $5 in a whole day of work. So getting that paid vacation day is going to be more valuable than $5, $10, or even $15 gift card. But even with these smaller incentives, you have a much a much better control over them, much better identification since you're running a field experiment. So, do you find a significant increase in donation when you give any incentive at all, and then rising as you increase the incentive?
Yeah, we did find positive effects of the incentives on individuals presenting to donate, on units of blood collected, and we find, and this is another outcome that we were very interested in, we find no effects on the likelihood that donors present to donate and they are ineligible because For example, they've engaged in certain types of behavior that make them quote, unquote, undesirable from a blood donation point of view. I'm talking about behaviors such as, having traveled to certain regions of the world where malaria is prevalent, for example, or engaging in unprotected, sexual activities and things like that. So we found positive effects of incentives on donations, and we didn't find any effect of offering incentives on those indicators of the quality of the donor pool, which is a big concern. The famous reference here is Richard Titmus's 1971 book, The Gift Relationship. In this book, Titmus argued that we shouldn't pay blood donors because, first of all, we may end up killing their or destroying their intrinsic motivation, but also because offering economic incentives might motivate the wrong, again in quotes, set of individuals to donate. His idea was that offering monetary incentives would induce people who are more likely to engage in behaviors that make them at risk of having a transmissible disease. And so the concern was that paid blood might contaminate the safety of the blood supply. Again, with the proxy that we used, we didn't find any indication of such an effect. So the higher amount incentives induce more people to donate than the lower dollar amount incentive. So essentially, we found effects that were in line with predictions from standard economic theory. I'm not a big fan of subgroup analysis, but we did do some subgroup analysis in our paper, and we didn't find any indication of crowding out of intrinsic motivation for any of the subgroups that we considered. If anything, the incentives had a stronger effects on donors with a longer blood donation history. They had stronger effects on donors who donated more frequently, and one could argue that those donation frequency and donation history might be proxies for intrinsic motivation. And so we didn't find that those donors responded less. If anything, again, they seem to be more responsive to rewards. We also found strong evidence of displacement effects, which suggests that blood banks and organizations should think very carefully about how to design the allocation of incentives, both across space and over time, because offering an incentive here today will get us more donations here today, but a good fraction of those extra donations would have taken place anyway elsewhere today or here 3 months from now. So we did find this evidence of spatial and intertemporal displacement. The spatial displacement is bad. But the intertemporal displacement is not necessarily a bad thing, because in the US, blood banks and hospitals face seasonal shortages, like periods of the year when donations are more scarce. And those tend to be predictable. It's typically, weeks around major holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, the summertime. And so using incentives to shift donations away from times of the year when they are more abundant towards times of the year when they are more scarce is potentially a good thing. So there were many interesting results in our study, and that are useful, I believe, both from an academic point of view. We gained a better understanding of what motivates blood donors, but also from the point of view of policy, or from the point of view of blood banks, that they could use some of our results.
Right. So just to be clear, the displacement effects don't entirely cancel the the regular effect, the effect of increasing donations. So if you give incentives at a particular time and place, some people will move their donations from the past, from the future to the present, or from the blood bank across town that isn't giving incentives to the one that is. But some people will donate who wouldn't have donated at all, or who who would have donated 3 times in the year. Now they donate 4 because you gave an incentive that one time. So there is still an increase, but it's not as big an increase as one might naively think if you just looked at a single blood bank that started giving a donation and on a certain day.
Yes, that is correct. So specifically, we found relatively large displacement effects for the $15 gift cards. About 45% of the extra donations that naively you would estimate if you didn't take displacement into account. About 45% of the extra donations were taken from neighboring drive. They would have occurred anyway. So nonetheless, yes, there still was a positive net effect. However, it's important to measure those displacement effects because okay, let me. So the $15 gift card generated that big displacement effect. The $10 gift cards generated a much smaller displacement effect. So all things considered, even though without, again, measuring the displacement, the $15 gift card with the naive approach, they look like they were the most effective incentive amount, it was the $10 gift card that produced the largest net effect on donations because they caused more people to donate at the drives where they were offered, and they didn't generate large displacement effects. So you're right, the incentives were still able to generate a positive net result, but measuring the displacement effect was crucial, both to establish that, yes, incentives do lead to increases in donations, but also to determine, what's the optimal incentive amount that, in that context, the blood bank should use to maximize the number of genuine extra donations collected.
So blood banks really should take from this that if they're going to give incentives in kind of a sporadic way, an incentive on a particular day or something, they should coordinate with other nearby blood banks so that they're not just pulling away or mostly pulling a large number of donations away from each other.
Correct. Coordinate with other blood banks might be difficult, but in the case of the Red Cross at the time of the study, they served between 80 and 90%. They collected between 80 and 90% of blood collections in the northern Ohio region. So they had to be careful, coordinate across their own blood drives.
So from these 2 experiments, I'm pretty confident that incentives work to get people to donate blood and potentially other parts of their bodies. But still, many people have ethical concerns. It's still not generally legal to pay to incentivize people in many circumstances. So let's talk a bit about your other experiment, your more recent one about ethical concerns and the reach of markets. How did you test? How did you run an experiment to test people's ethical views about compensating donors?
Yeah, let me take a small step back. So yes, the bottom line from my research on blood donor incentives was that you can blood banks can get more people to donate blood without jeopardizing the safety of their blood supply, with appropriately framed and designed economic incentives. So together again with Bob Slonim and Nico Lacetera, we put together sort of all of the evidence that we accumulated with our own studies, and also, from other studies, and we wrote a piece a policy piece that got published in Science back in 2013. And in that piece, we illustrated this evidence and essentially argued that the WHO, which is the World Health Organization, which has a very strong stance against using economic incentives with blood donors, we invited them to reconsider their position and sort of give incentives a chance. We got a lot of pushback from the WHO on that science piece, and essentially the key argument against our argument was an ethical one. The argument was that paying or compensating donors for body parts is morally wrong. And many people sort of have that view that paying for blood or plasma or organs is unethical for a variety of reasons. For example, that participants in these transactions might end up being exploited, or that these transactions are against fundamental values or against human dignity, that they would sort of lead to the commodification of the human body, which again is something that some people dislike and consider sacred values. There are also issues of undue influence generated by incentives. There's the idea that large incentives in particular, and here I'm thinking about incentives or payments to organ donors more than blood donors, because as you mentioned earlier, payments or incentives to blood donors tend to be small, that large payments might worsen the quality of decision making, that people might disregard risks or negative possible negative effects of giving organs when a large monetary or large economic incentives is offered. There are also issues of fairness, specifically, if with a market for kidneys, only the rich would be able to pay for a life-saving organ, and that is perceived as being unfair. So all this sort of discussion led me and my co-author Nico Lacetera and another co-author, Julio Elias, who's at the University of the SEMA in Buenos Aires in Argentina, to take those concerns seriously, the ethical concerns seriously. In doing so, we were taking the advice of Professor Alvin Roth, who won the Nobel Prize in economics back in 2012 for his contribution to market design, and who has sort of pioneered in economics the idea that ethical concerns pose constraints on what we as a society can do with markets. So we decided that we wanted to understand better those ethical concerns, and we started a sort of a new research agenda. The latest paper that you referred to earlier, Garrett, attempts to do precisely that. The goal of the paper is to understand the preferences of, in this case, Americans towards compensating organ donors. The motivation for the specific application that Julio, Nico, and I chose is that in the US, but this is true essentially in virtually every other country around the world, in the US there is a large and growing shortage of organs for transplantation. I believe that the latest figures are something like 115,000 people being on the waiting list for an organ in the US. About 95,000 of those are waiting for a kidney. Several thousands of patients die every year because they are unable to find a match or a kidney donor or an organ donor. So there is a big shortage, and that makes this a very policy relevant context where to study preferences and attitudes towards compensating people in a setting where there are strong efficiency reasons for introducing payments, meaning we have a shortage. By introducing economic incentives, we could increase the supply of organs, thereby saving lives, but where there are ethical concerns regarding the morality of doing that.
Interesting. Yeah, so it's I mean the commodification argument just it doesn't it I suspect it does not appeal to most economists, but it's very commonly held. But when when you just add up all the people who are dying, the thousands of people who are dying every year on these transplant waiting lists, it really sort of puts it in perspective, the abstract concern about commodification against actual people dying, which is very strange to me. I think most people probably have not thought it through. But so you have now measured people's preferences, and you've asked them to compare various alternatives to the status quo with respect to compensating donors, and you've gone further than that and sort of tried to figure out why they hold the views they do. So tell me about the various things you test. I know you ask people about cash versus non-cash incentives. You ask them about a system where the patients pay for kidneys or for organs versus one where some kind of public agency pays the donor. And you've also varied the amount of money given to the donor. So tell me about your experiment and what kind of what your subjects told you about their moral values.
Yes, so this is an online choice experiment. We worked with a survey firm that provided us with a nationally representative sample of Americans, which is nice. The experimental design is complex, and I invite the interested listeners to take a look at the paper. But what we did, yes, was we essentially elicited the people's preferences towards a set of possible paid donor systems. We varied the nature of compensation, cash versus non-cash, and non-cash essentially means items such as contributions to a retirement account, contributions to a college fund. And the idea there is that, the concern that some bioethicists and ethicists have expressed towards the use of cash is that cash might, particularly in larger amounts, might attract individuals who are desperate for economic relief or for cash, and who therefore might make a rash decision, might enter the decision to donate an organ without sort of having fully considered all the possible implications and consequences, whereas a non-cash reward would not attract individuals who are desperate for money. We varied the amount, $30,000 and $100,000. The idea here is that offering more money might reduce concerns that donors might get exploited. Okay, if you're again offering more money, but at the same time, there is some evidence that particularly large amounts of money might induce individuals to again downplay the risks of a certain transaction, and therefore it's possible that larger amounts of money might be perceived by third parties as being less ethically desirable than smaller amounts of money. And finally, we changed the identity of the payer. One of our main questions was in this study was to determine whether people are averse to donors getting paid, or they are averse to patients paying for an organ. So what we did is we had in some experimental conditions, we had patients paying for their organs, for the organs. They could either pay out of pocket or through health insurance. And in another set of systems, instead we had a government agency compensating organ donors, and the same government agency allocating organs to patients on the waiting list according to priority rules similar to those that are currently in place for allocating organs from deceased patients. This turns out it was a very important experimental variation to introduce in the study, because the concern that the aversion towards patients paying for the organ is the single most important ethical concern that we detected in our study. In other words, according to our study, Americans are not particularly concerned about organ donors receiving some form of compensation. They are, however, very concerned about poor people not being able to afford organs, and they think that a system where with private payments, where if you have the money or health insurance, you are able to purchase a kidney, whereas if you don't have the money, you are unable to do so. They dislike that very much. That is a crucial source of ethical or moral concern, according to our study. The implication of our study is that some of these, or at least the major ethical concerns towards towards paying organ donors, can actually be removed or softened or attenuated by appropriate institutional design or market design. For example, based on our findings, there's no way that the American population would tolerate or accept a system where people can buy and sell kidneys in an unregulated, decentralized marketplace. Whereas a system with a government agency compensating donors, and the same agency again, or another agency, but still an agency, a public agency, or an agency with public oversight, allocating organs fairly to patients in need, there would be a lot more support for such a system in the U.S.
Fascinating. Well, we're running low on time, although I could talk about this topic all day because it's so interesting. Mario, do you have any closing thoughts for the audience? Anything you'd like them to come away with, if they've listened to this conversation and they want to know more?
So one thing I would say is that one thing I learned from my work, and I hope to continue learning, is that societies face trade-offs, and those trade-offs need to be understood and taken seriously. The trade-off that shows up in this study that I that I just described is the trade-off between allowing certain types of transactions to take place, which might be distasteful to some, and or not, okay, or prohibiting those transactions. There's a cost to prohibiting certain transactions because in the context of kidney donation, for example, specifically, there's a severe shortage, and the consequences of prohibiting all forms of compensation are severe in terms of lives lost and also resources, societal resources being lost. So being aware of these trade-offs is important, and I think that social scientists should spend more time, particularly economists, to spend a bit more time, sort of, understanding the source of ethical concerns and figuring out ways to attenuate those concerns by designing transactions in ways that reduce the ethical concerns. Another sort of, today is, we are recording this on August the 2nd of 2018. Just a few weeks ago, a congressperson from Pennsylvania, Congressman Matt Cartwright, introduced a proposal for a bill that would do two things. The bill would clarify the definition of, what types of reimbursements are allowed for organ donors. For example, lost wages reimbursements and things like that. And the bill would also allow pilot programs, with of course, government oversight, with all the appropriate ethical clearances, to understand the effects of non-cash rewards to organ donors. I haven't seen all the details yet, but based on what I'm reading, I would sort of be very much in favor of such a proposal. I'm particularly sympathetic to the idea of running pilot studies. We talk a lot about evidence-based policy making, but in the context of organ donor incentives and as a way of reducing the shortage of organs, we really don't have a ton of evidence. And one of the reasons why we don't have evidence is that pilot programs of organ donor rewards are prohibited under the current legislation. I think we should encourage studies of organ donor rewards and measure very carefully their effects on organ donation, of course, but also on those aspects that some people find problematic. We should, for example, come up with ways to measure whether a certain reward causes undue pressure on the donors, whether it leads to worse sort of decision-making quality, and whether it leads to a perception of unfairness or a perception that some sacred rights or values are being violated. We need more evidence, and Congressman Cartwright's bill, it seems to me, it goes in that direction. So perhaps, Garrett, first of all, let me thank you for having me on your program. So perhaps, in a few years we can have another conversation and discuss the results of some new pilot studies of organ donor incentives, and hopefully we will have learned something useful.
Yeah, I hope that's the case. My guest today has been Mario Macis. Mario, thanks for being part of Economics Detective Radio.
A great pleasure. Thank you again.
That concludes the interview today. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did, because this is a topic near and dear to me, and I hope we make progress in the future with compensating organ donors so that we can save lives. If you want to join the discussion about this episode and others, go to Facebook and look up Economics Detective on Facebook. That's a closed group which you can request to join and just answer a few questions, and I will approve your request. The discussion question for this episode is, which of the arguments against compensating donors do you find the most compelling? And if you support compensating donors anyways, what about that argument fails to completely convince you? So again, that'll be a discussion we're having in the group, the Facebook group, Economics Detective on Facebook. I will be back next week with a new episode. I promise this time. I'm doing the interview literally in half an hour, so I'm gonna release another episode next week. I know I don't always do it. Life's been really busy, but this time I will. Thank you and goodbye.